Welcome back, fellow students of ancient history. Today we're diving into a really fascinating explainer on the mythological and moral dichotomy of fire. We're looking specifically at the records preserved in the legendary War of Crowns cycle. Now, as scholars studying ancient elemental forces, we often get caught up in a very specific narrative. When we hear the word fire in mythology, what's the very first thing that pops into your head? Probably a roaring inferno, right? Mass destruction, terrifying demonic forces demanding absolute worship from mortals. It's an instinctive reaction. But the ancient sources we're exploring today completely upend that traditional thinking. They reveal something far more profound. They show us a force of deep, intentional restraint. Today we're going to study Pyraen Sol. He is the master of natural fire. And we're going to understand exactly how the very earliest warmth of dawn served not as a weapon for conquerors, but as a deeply foundational law of moral balance. I am so thrilled to guide you through this, so let's get right into it.
Here is our syllabus for today's explainer. We'll be covering the origins of the Master of Natural Fire, the structure of the Court of Embers, the four ancient laws, a fascinating case study on Hearth Vale, and finally, we'll wrap up by comparing natural versus demonic flame. Let's jump in.
All right, Section 1, Master of Natural Fire, the ancient force of balance.
To truly understand Pyraen Sol, we have to mentally travel way, way back. We're talking about a time long before cities were built, before crowns were even a concept. We have to look to the crack between the very first stone and the very first storm. I want you to imagine a cold, utterly primordial world. Rivers are just barely moving under thick sheets of ice. Mountains are completely dormant, sleeping without a single trace of smoke. Huge forests are dreaming patiently beneath the soil, just waiting. It was into this exact stillness that the first storm struck a fallen forest. But here is the crucial part. This very first natural flame didn't rise up as pure, unchecked destruction. Not at all. It rose as an engine of change. It actually learned the language of sparks directly from the lightning. And then, eventually, it learned the mercy of hearths from the early humans who huddled around its heat to survive. And you can see this reflected perfectly in how Pyraen Sol chooses to manifest to mortals. He categorically rejects the flashy, royal crowns that demonic entities absolutely love to wear. No way. Instead, he takes a tall, human-like form. He has copper-brown skin that is marked by these faint, glowing cracks of gold light. It's almost like cooled lava that still remembers its own heat. His hair moves continuously, just like smoke in completely windless air. And pay close attention to his eyes. They aren't that raging, blood-red color you automatically associate with demonic fury. They're a deep, steady amber, like coals that have somehow outlived a massive, devastating storm. He wraps himself in a mantle of ember-colored cloth that simply never burns away, and he wears rings carved from the blackened wood of forests that actually survived historic wildfires. It's a completely different aesthetic, built entirely on endurance rather than rage.
Now, how did the other elemental powers react to him? Well, the old powers recognized him instantly, but they all interpreted him completely differently. The Master of Stone, for instance, looked at him and just saw danger, plain and simple. The Master of Forest was a bit more nuanced. They saw him as both a source of profound grief, but also necessary renewal. And the Master of Winds, they just casually called him a traveler. But the demons fundamentally misread him. To a demon, any fire just looks like raw, unadulterated power. And to their minds, power is simply a tool meant to possess and enslave others. But they completely missed Pyraen's true nature. His ultimate strength is actually defined by a terrifying level of restraint. Think about it this way. In a room packed full of roaring, out-of-control blazes, Pyraen is the one who could command every single wick to become completely drop-dead still. A flame that has the discipline to just wait rather than merely consume, that concept completely baffled the infernal lords. They just couldn't wrap their heads around it.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Court of Embers, a hierarchy of purpose.
So how exactly does an entity with such immense restrained power actually govern his domain? Well, unlike the absolute dictatorships you see in demonic realms, Pyraen's domain is organized into what's known as the Court of Embers. And this is fascinating because it's a hierarchy built entirely on use, memory, and consequence, rather than blind obedience. This isn't some pompous court that gathers in a giant marble palace. It gathers literally anywhere that fire is being used with respect. Let's break down the members. First up, we have the Hearth Mothers. These are small, intensely warm spirits, and their sole duty is to protect cooking fires, sick rooms, and winter houses. They actively, strongly dislike demons. Why? Because demons rely on fear to cross the threshold, whereas Hearth Mothers are all about providing unconditional, safe warmth. Then you have the Forge Brothers. These spirits understand honest hard labor. They are the keepers of metal and craft, and they know exactly how to harden the blade without feeding into a soldier's bloodlust. It's all about construction, not destruction. But then we get to the Ash Children and the Red Cedars. And this is where it gets really poetic. The Ash Children are these pale, completely silent figures. Their job is to carry the heavy memory of places that have burned down. They ensure that the sheer trauma of a fire is respected and never forgotten. And right on their heels come the Red Cedars. Their solemn, specific duty is to walk right through the devastation left by a wildfire. They step through the ashes specifically to wake up the sleeping roots buried deep beneath the soil. When you look at them all together, you realize every single member of this court facilitates a delicate, continuous balance. It is a constant cycle of protection and rebirth.
Which brings us nicely to Section 3, the 4 ancient laws, cultivating the wildfire.
To really grasp the core framework of natural fire, we have to look at its 4 ancient laws. The absolute best way to describe how Pyraen Sol applies these laws is to think of him as a cosmic gardener. What does a gardener do? They use controlled destruction, like pruning or clearing out dead brush so that the soil can breathe and new roots can awaken. It's exactly the same concept here. We have to sequence these laws to understand them. The first law is warmth. This is the absolute moral center of natural fire. A tiny hearth fire that keeps a child alive through a bitter, freezing winter, that belongs to Pyraen far, far more than any raging inferno on a battlefield. The second law is hunger. Look, fire consumes. That is just an undeniable fact of nature. But natural hunger always respects a boundary. A controlled flame cooks your food, an uncontrolled demonic flame, which is usually fed by arrogant pride, devours the entire village. See the difference? The third law is witness. Fire actually sees what we do in its light. It remembers the quiet promises spoken beside a candle, and it remembers the dark betrayals signed by the light of a torch. And finally, the fourth law, renewal. After the burning happens, the world absolutely must be allowed to grow again.
The ancient texts leave us with this incredibly profound, resonant truth. Fire is permitted to end a form, but not to abolish the possibility of life. Let that sink in for a second. It perfectly anchors the fundamental difference we're talking about today. If a flame sweeps through and leaves absolutely nothing but permanent emptiness behind, like those massive, erased countries left by the demon Belial, then that flame has become entirely corrupted. Pyraen doesn't judge the infernal crowns simply because they burn things. He judges them because their rage leaves absolutely zero room for return. There's no renewal.
Let's look at a real historical application of this. In Section 4, Case Study, Nerith Vale, Fire as Protection. As scholars, we love a good primary case study. So let's examine this fascinating historical encounter. We have Nerith Vale, a highly vulnerable border village. They found themselves completely surrounded by lesser demons who were cleverly disguised as famine spirits. Now, hunger, as the texts constantly remind us, can make even the wisest people bargain with the darkness. It's a desperate situation. These disguised demons start whispering to the village elders. They make a terrifying demand.
They want the elders to surrender their very names, and in exchange, they promise full granaries and healthy children. Sounds like a classic demonic trap, right? Well, on the exact night the elders were about to sign these dark contracts, a massive, violent lightning storm rolls in. A bolt strikes the oldest, most revered cedar tree right beside the village well. The tree literally explodes into this brilliant blue-gold flame. But strangely, the fire absolutely refuses to spread. It's totally contained. And then, Pyraen Sol steps directly out from the trunk of the burning tree. He doesn't boast. He doesn't yell. He certainly doesn't demand that anyone drop to their knees. He simply asks the elders to take those written promises and place them into the cedar's fire. This is the law of witness in action. The papers flat out refuse to burn normally. Instead, the hidden lies and corruptions woven into those contracts actually manifest. They crawl out of the parchment looking exactly like black insects. It's a stunning reveal, showing the villagers that these demons actually intended to steal their memories and their future children.
Once the truth was fully witnessed, the flame completely changed. It turned a blinding white and instantly consumed the insects and the lies. Now, the village did lose something precious. They lost their oldest, beloved cedar tree. The form of the tree was ended, but adhering strictly to the law of renewal, the ashes from that specific tree ended up making the village's fields incredibly fertile for 7 uninterrupted seasons. By sacrificing that single cedar, the village of Mareon Thal learned an absolutely vital lesson. Natural fire acts as a powerful protector. The village only survived because the flame destroyed the lie way before the lie could own the people, and it left them with a foundation to rebuild.
Let's bring it all together in Section 5. Natural versus demonic flame, the moral dichotomy.
To wrap up our explainer today, we really need to step back and put Pyraen Sol side by side with the great demonic lord, Belial. Visually, philosophically, elementally, the differences are just staggering. Demonic fire, like the kind Belial wields, always appears as a command. When infernal flame enters a room, it immediately demands recognition. It wants every single witness to drop to their knees and become a terrified subject. Infernal fire quite literally turns fear into its architecture. It builds with terror. But natural fire? It doesn't need your worship. It doesn't even want it. Think about it in your own life. A candle doesn't ask your family to sing its praises before it gives you enough light to read a book, right? A blacksmith's forge doesn't demand you build it a throne before it strengthens your iron tools. Natural fire exists simply to transform. And this inherent humility completely confounds demonic fire, which is entirely obsessed with enslavement and ego.
When you analyze these two forces right next to each other, you're really looking at Pyraen's profound restraint pitted against Belial's towering, unchecked arrogance. Pyraen proves time and time again that a power that knows exactly when to end itself is ultimately the most difficult power in the universe to corrupt. He could literally deny Belial ownership of fire itself simply by making common, everyday hearth fires absolutely refuse to become weapons. It's an incredible display of quiet dominance. In fact, there is this legendary meeting recorded in the texts between Pyraen and a mortal man named Mar. Now, Elian actually carried a literal ember of Belial's infernal flame right inside his chest. When he met Pyraen, that demonic ember immediately flared up aggressively. It was deeply offended by the presence of the older natural flame. But Pyraen didn't fight back with a bigger explosion. He simply placed a hand gently over Elian's chest. And as he did, he filled the air with the deep, grounding, earthy smell of rain falling on ash. He completely neutralized the aggression, delivering the ultimate truth of their elemental war without throwing a single punch.
During that encounter, Pyraen told Ilian something I really want to leave you with today. He said, demonic fire asks who you can command. Natural fire asks what you can keep alive. As you continue your studies, review these ancient texts and reflect on the incredible mythos of Pyraen Sol, I really want you to consider that lesson. Put yourself in Ilianmar's shoes. If you held such an incredible, world-altering elemental force right in your hands, how would you wield it? Does true power really lie in the arrogance of forcing others to kneel before you in terror, or does it lie in the quiet, restrained mercy of simply providing the warmth needed to help someone survive a cold, dark night? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today. Keep asking those big questions, keep studying the lore, and I'll see you in our next explainer.